All right, today we are decoding what might be one of the most ambitious pieces of tech legislation, well, ever written. I'm talking about the European Union's AI Act. This is the world's first comprehensive, legally binding set of rules for AI. And trust me, it's poised to change pretty much everything from the apps on your phone all the way to the future of global power. So let's get right into it. I mean, this is really the fundamental question of our time, isn't it? Who gets to make the rules for artificial intelligence? Well, for a massive market of nearly 450 million people, the European Union has just come out with a very, very definitive answer. And this is an answer that's not just going to shape the future of AI in Europe. Oh no, it's going to send ripples across the entire globe.
Okay, so to really get our heads around this whole thing, we're going to break it down into 5 key parts. First, we'll dig into the philosophy behind the law. Then we'll look at its core concept, the AI risk pyramid. After that, we'll cover the rules for what's called high-risk AI. Then we'll do a bit of a reality check and look for loopholes. And finally, we'll zoom out and see how this all fits into the global race for AI dominance.
All right, first up, the EU's digital philosophy. And this is so important because, look, to understand the AI Act, you have to realize that in Europe, tech regulation is never just about the tech itself. It's always about fundamental values.
And this slide just lays it out perfectly. It illustrates a concept from scholar Anu Bradford called digital empires. Basically, she says there are 3 competing models out there for how to regulate tech. You've got China's approach, which is totally state-driven, using tech to advance state control. Then you've got the US model, which is market-driven. It's all about innovation and letting the market lead. But the EU, well, they've carved out this really unique rights-driven path, where protecting people and their fundamental rights comes first. And the AI Act, it's pretty much the ultimate expression of that philosophy.
And this really gets to the heart of why the EU felt this was so incredibly urgent. This quote from AI expert Joanna Bryson, it's just a fantastic analogy. She says, to think of personal data like airspace. Before airplanes existed, nobody talked about defending airspace. It wasn't a thing. But once planes came along, suddenly you had to. Well, she argues that AI has turned our personal data into a potential hazard in the exact same way. It's that ability of AI to take little bits of harmless data and put them together into something potentially dangerous that for the EU makes regulation an absolute necessity, not just an option.
Okay, so that's the philosophy. Now let's get into the nuts and bolts, the core mechanism of the Act itself. Instead of some clunky, one-size-fits-all rule for all AI, the EU did something pretty smart. They created a tiered system based on risk, and the easiest way to picture it is as a pyramid.
So this pyramid is split into 4 different levels of risk. Right at the tippy top, you've got AI systems that are considered an unacceptable risk. We'll get to what that means. Just below that, you have the biggest and most regulated category, which is high risk. Then you've got limited risk, and finally, at the very bottom, this huge, broad base of AI with minimal risk, and those are pretty much left alone.
So let's focus on that very peak of the pyramid, because this is a really big deal. The Act basically identifies a small, specific list of AI uses that are considered a clear and unacceptable threat to people's fundamental rights. And the EU's solution for these? It's simple. An outright ban. Gone.
So what actually gets the axe? Well, think about government-run social scoring systems. Yeah, like something straight out of a dystopian movie. Or AI specifically designed to manipulate your behavior and get around your free will. The Act also bans just randomly scraping the entire internet for facial images to build databases. And it bans using emotion recognition tech in workplaces or schools. These are the really hard lines that the EU has decided to draw in the sand.
Now, way down at the lower end of the pyramid, for those systems with what they call limited risk, the key principle is super simple: transparency. All it means is that if you're interacting with a chatbot or you're looking at a deepfake image, you just have to be clearly told that you're dealing with AI. That's it. No deception, just a clear heads up.
Okay, now we get to the real heart of the Act. This is the section that's going to affect the most companies, and it's all about the rules for high-risk AI.
So, what exactly is a high-risk AI system? Well, essentially, it's AI that's used in really critical areas where, if it messes up, it could have a huge impact on someone's life or safety. Think about the AI that might be used to decide if you get a job or a loan or into college. Or we're talking about systems used in medical devices or to manage our power grids or even by the police and in courtrooms. These are the systems that are going to face the toughest rules. And for these high-risk systems, the Act lays down a set of really strict, proactive rules.
This means before one of these products can even hit the market, the companies behind them have to prove a few things. They need to show they have solid data governance to fight bias. They have to prove there's effective human oversight so a person can always step in. They need strong risk management systems built in, and they've got to keep clear, detailed records of everything. It's really all about building safety and accountability in from day one.
Okay, so far, this all sounds incredibly comprehensive, right? But now it's time for a bit of a reality check. We have to ask ourselves, is this law really as foolproof as it seems on the surface?
I mean, this idea of a neat, clean risk pyramid is a really powerful way to explain it all, but is it actually a foolproof system for governing a technology that's as complex and as fast-moving as AI?
Well, according to legal scholar Tobias Mahler, maybe we should be a little cautious. He argues that this whole risk-based approach is less of a systematic scientific evaluation and more of what he calls a narrative heuristic, which is a fancy way of saying it's a useful story. In his opinion, the final law is really a patchwork of political negotiations and compromises, not some pure technical assessment of risk. So those clean lines on the pyramid, they might be hiding a much messier political reality.
And this becomes crystal clear when you look at what's not covered by the Act. There are huge exceptions carved out for any AI system used exclusively for military or defense, or for national security purposes. I mean, let that sink in for a second. Some of the most powerful and potentially most dangerous AI applications out there, they fall completely outside of these rules. That leaves a pretty massive gap.
So let's zoom out for this final section and look at the global picture. Because even with those loopholes we just talked about, this piece of legislation is absolutely set to have massive consequences, far, far beyond the borders of Europe.
And that brings us to this really crucial idea in geopolitics, known as the Brussels effect. Here's how it works. The EU is one of the biggest single markets on the planet. So, because of that sheer economic gravity, big global companies often decide it's just easier and cheaper to build all their products to the EU's high standards rather than making different versions for different countries. And just like that, an EU law basically becomes the unofficial global standard.
And this really lays out the global playing field perfectly. You've got the EU with this comprehensive, legally binding regulation. Meanwhile, many observers would say the US has kind of fallen behind on creating any real comprehensive rules. And a lot of Asian countries have focused more on promoting AI, often using non-binding guidelines so they don't slow down innovation. It's this contrast that really sets the stage for the EU's rules to become that default global benchmark.
So what's the ultimate takeaway here? I think Joanna Bryson just nails it again. She calls the AI Act beautifully boring. And what she means by that is, when you strip it all down, the Act isn't some crazy, radical new idea. It's simply applying a principle that's been around forever to a new technology. And that principle is, if you make a product, you are responsible for making sure it's safe. It's about finally bringing that basic common sense accountability into our digital world.
So the EU has made its move. It has planted its flag and established a rights-based model for the age of AI. The big question now is, what happens next? Will the Brussels effect kick in and create a single global standard, or will the competing market-driven and state-driven approaches win out, leading to a kind of fractured digital world defined by these competing empires with totally different rules? The race to define our AI future? Well, it has officially begun.